And sometimes radical self-care is can come under criticism and attack and judgment because you might be breaking tradition.
Hello, this is the Mae B Mindful Podcast, and I am your host, Hannah Mae. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Mae, and it's Christmas Day. This episode's dropping on Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas from my heart to yours. I love Christmas. I love what it represents. Actually, I love all the holidays. I love what's available in them. I love what it can enkindle when we sit and we get quiet with it. I generally can generate a lot of gratitude. However, not going to lie, sometimes, depending on what's going on in your family, depending on what's going on with you, what kind of expectations you're putting on yourself or others may have on you, it can be extremely stress evoking. And I know people have a whole range of reactions to the holidays. So I kind of want to talk about that. I'm gonna talk a little bit about like how to nurture yourself through it, like how to get through it and enjoy yourself. Some people love the holidays. I'm in recovery circles, so I know a lot of, traumatized people that hate the fucking holidays. Like they just hate them. They don't want to be around their family of origin and they don't want to be triggered. And there's a lot of stuff around them that feels difficult to address and deal with or work through. If you have a family, it's like you really want to show up for your family. So if you have your own stuff going on, I think it's important to acknowledge that. But then, of course, you want to create a new experience for your family and you want to break cycles or whatever. Like I said, I love the holidays, but even okay, I'm just going to give you an example because family stuff can trigger things that you might not even know are there, especially if you're not really checking in with yourself and self-attuning. And that's a learned skill, right? That we're not really, a lot of us are not taught how to do. The vast majority are not. And I had this memory when I was thinking about this come up. I would go to my mom's. I loved going to my mom's. She was at the beach. When I lived back in California, I would go visit. And every time I would go there, I'm always like, I'm a pretty healthy person. Like I don't eat sugar anymore. I actually don't eat processed sugar anymore. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I'm too much of an addict. Like it just kind of gets me going and then I can't stop. So for me, it's better just not to eat it. I don't crave it because of that, which is fantastic. I don't really get sick. Like I'm pretty healthy, but there was a period of time where I was like on and off the wagon with it. And I would like have these sugar urges and I would eat it. And then I would have a really hard time putting it down. And I'd go to my mom's house and I'd find myself in the pantry with a spoon in the Nutella jar. And I'd be like, how did this happen? Like, why is this happening? And it was really interesting because I started to pay attention to just what was going on under the surface, the undercurrent of energy that was moving through my body, that when I started paying attention to, I had a dis-ease. I had something, an energy in me that was unresolved. And once I started to pay attention to that and attune to that and meet myself in that, I stopped going to the pantry in the Nutella jar. I was like, I actually resolved the issue when I became aware and conscious of what was actually going on with me and started to show up and meet myself in that. And I think that is actually the key to success, like with everything that we move through in life. And I talk a lot about it, like relentlessly showing up for ourselves, radical self-care. And sometimes radical self-care is can come under criticism and attack and judgment because you might be breaking tradition, okay? And like, don't fuck with tradition. People might not like it very much if you do something out of the norm and you impact other people's mode of operating. You start messing with the machine. It's like you throw a spanner in the mix. It can be a little jarring. And of course, it can be reflective for other people to see, sometimes people will have a reaction to that because it maybe doesn't enable them to keep doing something. And so, I know people that have had to not go home for the holidays. And in fact, they'll go home any other time of year, but just in honoring themselves and what comes up for them. And maybe it's just for a period of time. Maybe it's just for 1 year. Maybe it's while you're healing something. Maybe it's while you're moving through something. Maybe it's just what's best for your family that year. And like, you just don't do that, for whatever reason. As you know, I'm in recovery circles. So a lot of people, like, they just fucking hate it and they don't want anything to do with it. Now, does that mean they don't go home for the holidays? No, a lot of times they do, and they put themselves in situations that cause them harm and cause them to be agitated. Because why? Because they think they're supposed to, because they think they have to, because there's some unspoken rule that you have to. No, like, who made that rule? Guess what? If you're the adult, you get to make the rules. So I just want to talk a little bit about this kind of stuff, and like how when we start showing up in an awake, aware, conscious way, we can radically change the trajectory of our whole experience, right? Anyways, a friend of mine said to me, every time she's with her family and her brother, it's awful. Like, it's awful. It just plays out really awfully. There's always conflict. There's some high conflict people and some really not nice interactions. And the pressure of it being a holiday makes it even more intense. And she tries to hold it together and be nice and people please, but every time it plays out the same way. And she ends up really struggling and having a really negative experience. I said, well, maybe don't go, or maybe that high conflict person doesn't get to come if they come over and start a fire every time they come over. Maybe the fire starter shouldn't get to come inside. If they're a fire hazard and a threat to your environment and security, maybe they don't come. And she was like, what? I could never do that, because people would have a problem with that. I'm like, yeah, but it sounds like, you're having a problem with it as it is. Why are you expected to be okay with it and not have a problem with it? But nobody else can have a problem with it. First of all, it's just an assumption that everyone's going to have a problem with it. And it was just interesting because she didn't think she had the right to do that. But of course, we have the right to do whatever we want. It's just a matter of giving ourselves permission usually to do it. And that's kind of what a boundary is. Like, we're the last holdout. I think I talked about this in my boundaries episode. We're really the last holdout for what we allow to cross over the threshold of our comfort level or into our space. And then, of course, we want to celebrate. We want to maybe just show up and be present and be able to enjoy ourselves and not be so impacted or affected. And so I believe there is a way always to get clear within ourselves when we do our work, so that we don't have to be so affected by people around us in our environment. Now, having said that, sometimes the environment is too toxic, and like, depending on where we're at in our work, it might not be the best choice for us. There's been times where I've taken space from certain people or certain events or situations, because when I really do an honest check-in with myself, I'm not on solid ground. I feel a little tender. I feel a little wounded, and I don't think that would be in my best interest to put myself or my family through that. And so I honor that for myself. And that's taken me a lot of years to get to the place where I can honestly assess that for myself and give myself permission to really check in and do that, and sort of disobey and like break the rules and like be a rebel and be like, you know what, that's the tradition. Well, guess what? Not for me, not today, because I care about myself. And when you have a family and you have your own children, you also, like, that's your priority. Like, you get to like be an adult, and you get to not have to be the child anymore, which, whether you have kids or not, you get to be the adult. We get to grow up, we get to heal the child and grow up and take responsibility for ourselves, whatever that looks like. But yes, there's always a way to get neutral. There's always a way to get neutral on resentments and conflict and get back into our power and not have to be so affected. And that's really powerful work to be able to do that, to be able to navigate life, period. But sometimes it's a case-by-case situation. And sometimes at the end of the day, it's like, you just got to make a decision and stick to it. And I've noticed a lot of times with people pleasing, with codependency, there's a lot of indecisiveness comes up because there's a lack of self-trust. There's a lack of feeling usually that child was not empowered, right? To be able to make decisions, to be able to say no, to be able to have a boundary even. In stepping into that as an adult, it can feel very scary. It can feel like we're really stepping into that and learning that. And it's sort of like, okay, what's going to happen now? This is uncharted territory. And sometimes there's this like shame burn off that has to happen when we do something, or we speak up for ourselves, or we break tradition, or we step outside the lines, like the rules that, or the box that we felt like we had to operate and live in, that maybe they were spoken rules, maybe they were unspoken rules, and that conditioning. But it's so freeing and liberating when we do. There's so many ways to do this, to cut this, right? To see what works. And it really comes down to thine own self be true. What is going to work best for me, for my family, for whoever you're dealing with. I think one of the most profound and powerful ways to show up in a situation is already full. Okay. So like when you show up full, filled up, grounded, centered, that's everything, because you're going in on solid footing, and the last thing you want to do is go in empty. Because when you go in empty, you go in need. What are those needs? Those needs are expectations. That can set us up to have expectations. A lot of times, if we're taking those expectations to people around us, that can set us up for disappointment. Those disappointments can set us up to be resentful. You know, there's a saying in 12-step that expectations are premeditated resentments. And it's like the truest thing I've ever heard. Isn't it amazing? I think that when we're in need and we're wanting something, then we're going in from a place of lack already. And that's just a disaster waiting to happen. So I really just don't recommend that. I really recommend showing up with this attitude more of service, with a full heart of what can I bring? You know, like what can I bring? What can I give? How can I serve? And I know for me, when I show up that way, my heart is full. My energy is expansive, and I show up differently, and I impact people differently. I'm going to be less likely to be disappointed if I am in that solid, grounded, expansive place where my sense of well-being is not being determined by what somebody else outside of me does or doesn't do. So that's like the number one biggest thing I think that has helped me either enjoy any situation, get actually a lot more out of it, have a lot more gratitude for whatever it is, however it plays out, or at least not be severely disappointed or not have my needs met if I was taking them in vain to a situation or to a person that most likely doesn't have the capacity to meet them. Or they may, you know, depending on what's going on with that person, right? I don't know. That depends on the cycle and the pattern that maybe that you have in place with those people, those dynamics that could go really poorly. And I've experienced it go poorly, and I've witnessed it go poorly. Oh my goodness. It's just so much nicer to be able to go in with love without an expectation for reciprocation. Without expecting something in return, because that can be a little bit self-seeking, right? And that's a setup. That's a real setup for disaster. The other thing is have yourself a backup plan. Okay, have yourself a backup plan. If you're going into a potentially volatile situation, put some parameters on it up front, and you've got yourself a plan anyways. And if you need to use it, you can. Or you just keep it short and sweet. I mean, if you know that you normally need to tap out, and that's your limit, like say 2 hours in, then make a plan and stick to it and get yourself out. Like if you know how these things go. And you know, if it doesn't happen and you're pleasantly surprised, then that's awesome. I think one of the best things I ever did for myself, and this is a really small thing, but these small measures in order to self-care are really impactful. And one of the most revolutionary things I ever did for myself was on Thanksgiving Day. I love Thanksgiving Day, okay? But it's high stress, it's high pressure, there's a shit ton of cleanup, there's a shit ton of cooking, there's a lot of people. I went for a walk in the middle of meal prep on Thanksgiving, okay? That's not something that is easy to do, to pull yourself away once you're embedded and like immersed in like all the happenings and the doings, and you're sort of an integral part of the meal prep and the process, right? And it was at my house, so I really wanted it to be a certain way and go a certain way, but I was like, you know what, everything can wait, because I was starting to feel that buildup where there was more anxiety in my body, and it was sort of like filling up, and it was like water rising, and I was like, this is not a good feeling. I don't like this, and I need to shift it, right? So if I'm not going to shift it, who else is going to shift it? Nobody else is going to shift it for me. Even if they wanted to, it's not possible really for them to do that. So I just decided to stop, drop everything, and I went for a walk. And I went and I made a few calls to some fellows, and I connected with some people. I checked in, and I just went outside and I breathed and I meditated, and it was beautiful. It was amazing. I think I took 25 minutes, 30 minutes maybe, and I came back and I was fine. And I was like, wow, I don't know, it felt kind of radical for me. So anyways, it was just a small thing, but it really turned it around for me, and it made me realize how important it is to check in with ourselves and go, okay, what am I needing? And that's what I did. I literally was like, okay, what is this feeling? What do I need to do to release this feeling? So I bailed. I was like, peace out, guys. There's been situations with myself and what I've witnessed with others where self-care is criticized and not looked at favorably. And the only time every single time I've either heard these stories, experienced them, witnessed them, it's always as a result of the person who's not happy is actually in need of taking that same measure for themselves, and they don't know how. And they're angry about it. So it's projected anger. That's what I see over and over again. And that's actually not my problem. That's not your problem. That's not anybody's problem except for that person that's angry, right? That actually takes a little bit of courage or a lot of courage, depending on the force of the energy or who it is and how much of a pattern that is in your life with that particular person. So anytime we go back home into family, we can be pretty easily triggered, not because people are out to get us, but just as a result of unconscious behavior, usually. I mean, unless you're dealing with a malignant narcissist, who actually is out to get you, which that's a real thing. Like, that's a very real thing for some people. And that's a different story. And maybe don't go home for Christmas if that's happening for real, because that's probably not going to go well. And you can't really reason with that. And if you're targeted, you're targeted. And that just kind of sucks. But when you go home, the reason why people get so triggered is because everybody knows where everybody's buttons are. And, your family of origin put them there. They installed them in the hardwiring. They didn't do it intentionally, but they did it. So they know exactly where they are. They know exactly what to do. And again, they're not out to get you. They're not doing it intentionally. It really is unconscious behavior. And so when you're around other people that are unconscious, you have to be awake for yourself. And that's just in general in life, I think. This is how you successfully navigate and take care of yourself and protect yourself and preserve yourself from certain situations, and figure out like what you want to be and what you want to make yourself available for, and what kind of experience you want to have. I think probably for me now, the biggest takeaway in my own work of how I enjoy myself and how I show up for my family and how I just show up in myself and what kind of experience I'm going to have is really based on what I initially said, which is like how I get filled up. Like, that's my job. Nobody else's job to do that for me. And then service, how I show up with a full heart, how I cultivate more gratitude, love, joy in my own heart by being that. Not in a way that's like people pleasing or codependent. Those are old patterns, right? That's not doing everything for everyone at the cost of myself. That's actually pretty sick and unwell. Any criticism on healthy behavior is pretty much always a projection. If somebody doesn't have a tolerance for that. And then of course, sometimes it can look like somebody's being selfish. Like, you can be just like, wow, they don't have a very giving spirit. Maybe they're kind of just out for themselves. But you know what? what I've come to understand is I don't really get to judge that because I don't really know what that person's going through, and I don't really know what they're needing to do for themselves in order to just be okay. I don't know. I have no idea. And I think when we pretend to know, it can be just a little condemning and not very nice, and then not in alignment with the spirit that maybe we're preaching and saying what other people should be doing. Another thing that I really think that's worth mentioning is workload and honestly assessing your capacity for what you're committing to do. And are you committing to do something impulsively, recklessly, not considering things like yourself, your family, or thinking it through? I mean, just as a very small example, I'm just going to use this as an example. And it's not small because it's the day. The day is usually about food prep, blah, blah, blah. So if you decide you're going to make like 17 dishes and not ask anyone to make anything else, you kind of just screwed yourself. And I know people that are afraid to ask other people to bring something because people don't bring things. So they think they don't have the right to ask them to bring something. Well, maybe people aren't bringing things because they're not being asked, or there's no expectation for them to bring something. And if they're just showing up to get fed and for someone else to do the work, then I don't know. I think you have a right to be like, no, that doesn't really work for me. And if something doesn't work for you, it just doesn't work for you. You don't have to explain yourself as to why it doesn't work for you. It just doesn't fucking work for you. I mean, just reverse this for a second. If you were to say, hey, please make the turkey and bring 17 sides and be here by this time, like that would be a little ridiculous. So I think it's really funny sometimes if you've fallen into a certain role, sometimes we have a hard time giving ourselves permission to get out of that role. There's nothing wrong with a request. And sometimes people don't think they have the right to make a request. It can feel uncomfortable. Maybe they have a hard time asking for things. Some people have a really hard time asking for help. That's not in their comfort zone at all. Please get comfortable asking for help. And if someone says, hey, how can I help? Give them a job. Just give them a job. Think of something. People really like to help. People like to feel a part of. I mean, some people don't, actually. Some people are kind of selfish and they just like to sit around and be served. So like, as far as keeping a balance for yourself, if you're hosting or whatever, be mindful of what you take on. And it's not your job to carry other people's burdens for them. Now, you might want to, and if you do, and you choose to consciously because it's something that's in your heart to do, then that's beautiful. To extend yourself in a charitable kind way is actually very energy generating and life-giving. If you're doing it because you think you have to, or you don't feel like you have the right to say no or have a boundary for yourself, that is very different. That is energy depleting. And there's a big difference between the two. So I'll let you think about that. But yeah, at the end of the day, like trying to do everything is not actually that heroic, in my opinion. You can kind of end up making yourself the perpetual martyr, and we've all known those people where they do everything and then they resent everyone for it. It's like, well, wow, what a generous spirit. I don't want to be that person. I have been that person. I don't like when I'm that person. And I think also having 6 kids, like, kind of got me to a place where I've just thrown up my hands before, where I've done and I've done and I've done. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm doing other people a disservice, actually, like as far as, motherhood goes, like to my children, I'm doing them a disservice to not expect their participation and help and to just do everything for them. I'm not teaching them these important skills, right, of showing up, carrying their own weight, like being responsible. But I don't think I'm setting a particularly good example if I'm modeling, do everything myself, disregard myself, and don't ask for help. That's not how I want them to go through their own life. That's not how I want them to show up in a holiday. And I don't want, like, anything we do as a parent, the experience that we're having as a parent is part of how we're contributing to the environment. My state of being is what I'm radiating. It's my energy, and kids feel energy. Like, energy is everything, not just kids. Like, everybody feels energy, whether they acknowledge it or not. Some people are more sensitive to it than others, But I think at the end of the day, everybody feels it, and maybe they just don't know how to identify what it is necessarily. But, that's part of the experience that I'm contributing. I'm imprinting this experience of this holiday for future generations, and it's going to impact the way they view holidays in the future. And I really try and consider that today, as far as, I don't do it perfectly because I'm a human and nobody does it perfectly, but as far as how I show up and the kind of experience that I want to create for myself, for my children, and for them, for their future, it's like everything's a teaching moment really with kids, and you're creating an imprint with everything that you do. I mean, that's the radical responsibility of being a parent. It's great to like wake up to this shit, So yeah, and speaking of that, like a lot of times, like for a lot of years, when I was a very new mom, I was still sort of the child in my family of origin. And I would really go with needs and wanting it to be a certain way. And it took a minute for me to shift gears and go, I love my family. That's my family. Yes, I still have these needs here, right? But it's time for me to shift the focus and to really see where and how I can give and contribute and build this new family that I'm creating and participating in and raising. When you have your stuff coming up, that can feel really challenging to be available for. It can. And that's when you see people not being present or available in their families a lot of times, is because they're being flooded by their own stuff. But to make the very clear and decisive shift and have the intention of, how can I generate more love and gratitude? How can I show up? How can I make this a connective experience for me and my loved ones? That really can be a really powerful intention and shift the experience also, if you have stuff coming up, because the holidays do bring things up for people for sure. So whatever people have going on, there's always a way to navigate it when we check in with ourselves. If there's any confusion, right? If we're indecisive and we're confused and we don't know what the right thing is, like what I should do, that's something to really just consider putting down. Just put it down, like put it over there. If you really want to go back to the indecisive confusion and the rules, you can, but just give yourself permission to just put it the fuck down and just sit with yourself and check in with yourself. See where you're at. What is it that you're wanting for you, for your family? And then can you make that happen? And how do you do that? And what can you do? And if you can, then just do it. The only person that's telling you not to is yourself, because nobody else is in charge. We're all adults here. And usually it's funny because if we don't think we can, or we don't think we have the right to do something, like that's actually the child talking. That's a younger part of ourselves, and that's not true self. That's not true self. Like when I say to myself, oh, I couldn't do that, I can't do that, or I have to do that, that implies that that's an impulse-driven activity. That's not my adult true self talking. That's most likely a younger part of me, or some aspect of myself that doesn't have resolution. So whatever your day looks like, I hope it's blessed. I hope it's beautiful. I hope you could nurture yourself and just fill up. And I always find the last few days of the year really interesting, because there's a pause gets put on things. And it's really a time to, there's a lot of opportunity in that, to reflect and to see how you want to move forward with wherever you're at. So happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you guys in the new year. Mwah! Love you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com, or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at maybemindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,